Okay.
All right, welcome everyone to World Retrospectives Day. This is Faye Thompson. I'm with the Central Ohio Agile Association based in Columbus, Ohio. And I am here with Dana Pylayeva.
Hello everybody, my name is Dana and I'm representing New York Scrum user group. I'm an Agile coach from Hudson's Bay Company. I'm happy to be here.
And we have Joanne Perold from South Africa.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne. I represent the Scrum user group of South Africa and I'm an Agile coach with Agile 42 and very excited to be here.
And of course, we have our guest of honor, Esther Derby, and author along with Diana Larson and Ken Schwaber of Agile Retrospectives.
And here I am from lovely, lively Duluth, Minnesota, where we're having a heat wave.
What's a heat wave constitute?
40 degrees.
Ooh, it's almost springtime then.
No, sometime in April. So I work with organizations to help them be more effective and pay attention to their organizational dynamics. And retrospectives fit in with that.
Excellent. So we thought we'd give you a summary of how World Retrospective Day came to be. I don't know, Dana and Joe, if you want to explain to us where the idea came from.
Sure, I'll start and then Joe, if you want to jump in at any time, please do, so I don't misrepresent what happened. So a lot of people may not be aware, but every year a group of people who are passionate about retrospectives, they come together for retrospective facilitator gathering. And this year it was my first time being there. It was amazing. And this is where the idea came up to share the knowledge about retrospective, about the effectiveness of retrospective, and invite people to bring the practice into more areas of their organizations. And we wanted to make one day where each and every community is having an event dedicated to retrospective in whatever format they are interested in doing it. Joe, if you want to add a few more.
No, I don't think there's too much to add. We were just really excited about sharing retrospectives and how they've really impacted a lot of the lives that we have and as well as the teams that we've worked with. And we wanted to be able to try and share that with other people. And we know that there's lots of awesome people out there that are doing really, really great stuff, especially along the lines of retrospectives. And so we wanted to create a space where people could share that and kind of spread the word even more. So that was kind of the idea.
And I thought it was a fantastic idea and wanted to get involved because retrospectives are one of my favorite team building tools and continuous improvement tools. So I think it was a fantastic idea. And for anyone who's attending an event and isn't familiar with it, this is an event as the sun goes. So wherever you are in the world, there are people, I think we are up to 50 events all around the world now.
That's fantastic.
The same day. Yeah, this is really wonderful. So thankfully, Esther was able to join us and talk a little bit about her experience over the years with retros. So first of all, can you talk a little bit about an evolution of retrospectives you've seen since the book was published? It was, I think, released in 2006.
Yeah, 2006. Well, I think many more people are practicing retrospectives, and I've seen a lot of people adding new activities and new ways for people to think, learn, and decide together. I think we're also coming up against the fact that in a lot of organizations, particularly the sort of late adopters of Agile, they may follow the ritual of a retrospective, but they don't actually build in any time for people to do experiments and to actually think and learn new things and improve. So I hope that we can build awareness that actually to have effective retrospectives, you need to have the time to think and learn and actually experiment with things and try things.
So Joe, what are you seeing in the organizations where you go in as a coach?
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of really, in the beginning, people with really great intentions and the sadness is only ever asking 3 questions. What went well, what can we improve, and what didn't go so well. And then, 3 retrospectives down, that everybody's bored. They've taken care of all of the low-hanging fruit. There's not that, they didn't really create a great space for people to, as Esther said, think, learn, and decide. And so the retros are ineffective, and people are getting frustrated, and then they get kind of pushed aside as a waste of our time. This is a waste of our time. Do we really have to do this? So that is kind of a big frustration. That's the one thing that I see. The other thing that I see, and that I'm trying, like, that's my big, I think it's my big 2018, what are we going to do about this thing, is that people, there are a lot of really, no one's giving people facilitation skills. And so for me, that's my big thing, is like, it's not just about asking better questions, it's about having better facilitation as well. Because you can do the great steps that Esther and Diana laid out in the book, and if you've got a crap facilitator, then
Yeah, I actually think facilitation skills are critical leadership skills for anybody in the organization. If you're working with other humans to help them, process information together and reach decisions, I think it's skills that everybody should have who, ever leads a meeting. So, how about you, Faye?
I would agree. And I think that I would agree that organizations, where I see organizations fall down is, like you said, not do anything with the outcome of a retrospective. So then it very quickly becomes perceived as a waste of time. And it's even more ingrained because it's like the organization is voting to not take teams' ideas seriously. And
it's incredibly demotivating.
Exactly. So
cynicism abounds.
Exactly. So where I see teams stop doing retros or aren't fully engaged in them, it's often because of that, because they didn't pull that in. What have you experienced, Dana?
I'm seeing 2 trends. One, because people are not seeing the value in retrospective, and because they're pressured in time, they're not willing to experiment. And the way I'm trying to sneak retrospectives in is by offering them something very short. It's almost a small digest of all the steps together in one exercise. And happiness histogram is one of the ways that I tried doing that. So showing them value of something that's very concise and effective, and maybe helping select just one improvement for the next iteration. So sneaking things in, trying tools like story cubes just to make things fun. Yes, that's one thing. And another thing, there is a lot of large projects that not necessarily using any of the agile practices or frameworks, but I feel that there is an opportunity to start introducing good retrospectives even for those end of project retrospectives. And show that for groups of 60 people, right?
So that's where I actually started doing retrospectives, was on big projects.
Okay.
Right. I mean, the longest retrospective I have ever done was 4 days with a day of rest in between on a 4-year project that had resulted in a system where when they put it into test, not a valve move, not a lever flap, nothing happened. And they wanted to get some learning out of this fiasco. So that's where I actually started doing retrospectives.
And what were some of the outcomes of that 4-day retro? Did you see any?
That was super interesting because they actually made a list of management actions, and the managers, when I talked to them a year later, were still processing stuff and updating their list of things they needed to do. So that actually resulted in a bunch of management action, which on that scope of a project, that's where most of the action needed to happen. I mean, one of the really interesting things that occurred during that retrospective was I asked people to line up in order of like chronologically when they learned that the project was in a lot of trouble. And of course, recognizing that people in management can't necessarily say, oh, I knew from the day it was screwed. the managers were all like, oh, we learned a month ago. And the developers were all, no, we knew. and there was a huge amount of resentment and distrust because of that, because the developers had tried to let them know. So one of the things I did in that retrospective was I broke the managers and the developers into two groups, and I had them write a letter to each other. And it took several revisions to get all of the swearing and blame out of them. But once they revised them, they were able to say in a clear and non-blaming way, you know, this is what we'd like from you. And they both were able to do that. It was really interesting to see how that dynamic worked.
Wow.
So Faye, I think you had some questions from
Yes.
the world at large. I think we already answered one of them, which is when would you not do a retro?
Which is, the answer was
Well, no, actually, if you're in an organization where you are never given any time to work on any improvements, and it's just you're not getting any traction from them at all, not even your own, you know, edification as a team, then don't do them. Right? Or if they're being used to blame people.
Okay.
I've heard about organizations where the manager wants a report of all of the actions and who was at fault and who needs to improve, and that don't do them. If they're a vehicle for blame, don't do them.
So let's talk to you about some of the positive experiences. Like, what are some good changes we've seen come out of really successful retros?
I've seen teams form around them, that they really learn how to work together as a result of their retrospectives over time.
Yeah, I've seen a team change over time. Where when I first started with them and I first started doing retros, I used to do that explorer, shopper, vacationer, prisoner exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning with this team, I had maybe an explorer some of the time, maybe some shoppers, like quite a few vacationers, and at least 2 prisoners. And about a year, probably about a year later, so it did take a while, but I had no prisoners. One I had upgraded one of the prisoners to vacationer, but mostly explorers and shoppers, which was really quite nice. Yeah, and that team actually learned. Yeah, they learned how to work together better, and they also learned how to problem solve. And think through some of the things that they were doing. They were like more critical about how they were thinking about the way that they worked.
Maybe we should tell people what the explorer, shopper, vacationer, prisoner exercise is in case they haven't heard of it.
We probably should, yeah.
Yeah. So
yes.
So it's a little exercise to say what your level of engagement and participation is. And you can be an explorer who really wants to just delve in and learn everything you can. You can be a shopper, which, I'm shopping. If I find one good idea, one bargain idea to take home, I'll be happy. Vacationers are just, it's a break from the rest of the day. And prisoners is, I feel like I have to be here. I'm under compulsion. So it's a really interesting gauge to watch in that period of time, to say people are becoming more actively engaged in the life of this team and in their engagement with their coworkers and their willingness to take action in their own sphere where they have control. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at over time.
Yeah. What about you, Dana? What are some positive impacts you've seen from good retrospectives?
Yeah, I feel that teams are beginning to believe in their own power to change things. Yeah. Because when they come back to retrospective and you take them to the last time's actions that you did. That was kind of them saying something good.
No, it was the something breaking through my do not disturb notifications.
An agile angel got its wings.
Oh, that was it. Sorry.
That's okay. So what I was saying is that when you take them back to the actions they selected in the last retrospective, and then you come this time and you're seeing that those actions have been accomplished, and team is seeing that, yes, we said we will make these changes and we were able to make those changes, that empowers them to believe in the power of retrospective, believe in their own power, so it's not becoming somebody else's problem to solve issues in the team. It's something that team can address.
So that's really about their own empowerment, right? So people talk about empowerment, but that's a real example of it. That's interesting.
And I like starting retrospectives with the appreciation puzzles, risk and wishes, because appreciation is the big part of why we would feel good as a team and would feel empowered.
I'm going on mute for a minute. I have to go take care of my dog. Sorry.
And Faye, what's something that you've seen that's been?
Yeah, one of the most powerful examples I've seen is a team that really bonded over the discussions that happened in a retro and over the course of several retros surrounding their development practices. And I'm about to sneeze. Thank you. That's why we're going to edit. Watching a team bond over their development practices and open discussion of that, where they didn't feel a particular teammate was adhering to quality practices and kind of going off on his own. And the discussion occurred, I would say, probably over probably 3 different retrospectives, where the ultimate outcome was the team as a whole decided how they wanted to change their practices and how they wanted to work together. And the ultimate outcome of that was, it's true that that teammate didn't actually buy into those development practices, and he ultimately self-selected off the team. I think because we dealt with it through open discussion, what seemed like respectful discussions, there were no hard feelings over it. It was just really, well, we want to work this way. I don't want to work that way. Okay. So
That's awesome. It's okay. You don't have to work this way. It's just that if you want to be part of this team, then that's how we want to work. So,
right.
We need to have a different discussion.
Right. And I should say they were quality issues. The team wanted to make sure that they were working toward continuous integration and continuous improvement. They were not, left of field or anything. So that was really interesting to watch that team come together and even getting through that really difficult discussion, because it was awkward, especially at the beginning. Beyond that time, the subsequent conversations were a lot easier. People were much more willing to come forth with issues rather than having them kind of drawn out of them. So it was a huge trust building exercise.
So that's really interesting too, because it gave people a space and a structure in which to have these conversations, that without which they maybe never would have happened, or they would have happened in a more kind of behind the scenes blaming sort of way, and the manager would have come in and it would have been an HR event, blah blah blah. So, right. I mean, that's what I'm hearing through the thread of these stories is that it's not just about improving our practices, although that's an important thing to do, and improving our quality, that's an important thing to do, but really supporting people to learn how to work together in a really collaborative way and have the conversations they need to have. So it creates that structure and that space. That's exactly. Fantastic. That's what we were hoping for.
Exactly. So I must say, for personally, my small team in South Africa that we're part of, we also retrospect because we like to eat our own dog food, and it's helped us significantly. We've had some kind of tricky discussions that have come up through retrospectives, and just creating that space for ourselves and being brave enough. The team members that needed to say stuff were really brave, and that's helped us to pull us through and helped us to be a much better team on the other side of that. And so also to experience it as well as kind of help teams to do it.
because it's not easy.
Yeah, but this stuff always comes up, right? In every work situation, these things come up, and if you don't have a way to talk about them and process them, they fester and really destroy trust and collaboration.
Right. We talk a lot about how, as with anything, those issues were there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sometimes people feel that you have awkward conversations in a retrospective. Well, let's not have any more retrospectives because it yielded awkward conversations. Well, those situations existed. We just like you said, developed a respectful mechanism for addressing them.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're all the better for it moving forward. So one of the questions that came up was, how do we encourage people to try more creative retrospectives? I think, Dana, you mentioned you see a lot of teams that just want to go with the what worked, what didn't, what needs improvement, something like that. I see a lot of, sometimes I go into new teams and I see them using what worked, what failed, and kudos, something like that, which always makes me cringe a little bit, just saying, oh, we failed at something, rather than we try, it's not in the line of an experiment or something. But how can we help people overcome reluctance to try something different?
To me, it's starting small, and I mentioned story cubes because it's like really tiny prop you can bring into any retrospective and just kind of give people a taste for, hey, there is a small exercise that's actually helping us to be more engaging, and just experimenting, looking for different options that are available out there. Just want to share one more thing called RetroMat, which is a collection of different activities, and you can actually flip through and put together these 5 steps of retrospective with different activities and exercises, and just share those practices with others, and let them start small and expand.
I feel really bad I don't have any props other than my cup.
You have your microphone.
Oh, well, I don't know that I need to show off my microphone. So it's kind of impressive, though. So I think those things like story cubes and all exercises and activities can be super, super useful in getting people out of kind of their habitual thinking. And I still run into groups who, if I came in with story cubes, that would be the end. I mean, because they're super engineering focused, very analytical, come from a background or a workplace where, it's all like we have to focus on work. And those things can seem to some people to be sort of frivolous and, this isn't real work. That doesn't mean you can't get creative, right? Because I think sometimes we think that being creative means we have to have a game or an activity or something. And that's absolutely not the case. I mean, sometimes I use like really analytical techniques in a retrospective, so doing some data analysis, looking at the statistics about something, it still prompts people towards more creative thinking, more holistic thinking, processing information as a whole rather than just individually. So if you have a group that's open to story cubes, I personally really like that. Another thing I used to have was I have a jar of Chinese fortune cookie fortunes. I just have them in a jar, so we pick those out. So there's a lot of creative things you can do like that. If you have a group that turns them off, it doesn't mean there's no way to be creative. You just look at what are some of the analytical exercises, some of them that come out of some of the theory of constraints thinking tools are super helpful, and they're, can't really write them off as fluffy. Some of the stuff that comes out of, some of the old TQM exercises are perfectly useful in retrospective. So there's a lot of ways to be creative, and you gauge it to the people you're working with. So don't force them into a point where they're going to dismiss you, but take them there.
Right. I like something as simple as just playing around with phrasing those simple questions differently. I'm really asking, what do we feel like we're doing well, and what do we feel like could use some improvement? But maybe phrasing, sometimes it's around a season, like coming into springtime, I'll probably ask along those lines, like, now that we're headed into the new part of the year, what do we think we might like to try differently? with the team I'm a part of now. I'm experimenting with theming their retros around, and the same questions, but theming them around the Scrum values. So this week we talked about what are some ways that we demonstrate commitment, and what are some ways that we can improve our commitment. And commitment is commitment to our team, commitment to a product owner, not committing to story points, as often happens, but just what are ways that we're demonstrating commitment to good work. And it just spurred the conversation a little bit.
I thought of another one. Jenny Tarwater brought up one where her teams were looking at focusing their retrospectives around the principles of agile software development. So they did a different principle every time. That was a really neat way to, have a different level of conversation.
Yeah. And I should say we had great conversations. We had people who said, I really feel like we're all committed to putting out the best product we can. And it's because we have Amigo reviews and we work together. We're all in this, we're in our space together, working together, and sharing ideas, and no one is ridiculed or has their ideas thrown out. And I feel like we're committed to each other and committed to taking care of each other and committed to putting out a good product. What about you, Joe?
I found that even sometimes hardcore engineers find it hard to resist Star Wars Lego. If you can be credible with Star Wars Lego, then you can convince sometimes even the most hardcore engineers to try something interesting. So I've done that once or twice, which has been quite fun, and also experimented with different ways of asking questions. A bit like you, Faye. At the end of the year, I like to, in South Africa, especially at the end of the year, it's very much kind of a summer holiday feel, and so people are tired, and they're just kind of, and a lot of South Africa goes on holiday for a good couple of weeks, and so as a kind of end of year retro, I like to ask people what did they learn this year, what do they think that we should celebrate this year, and then what are some New Year's resolutions for us to kind of take into next year.
Nice.
And that can kind of elicit quite interesting stuff. And it's not like a heavy, because sometimes at that stage teams are just tired, you know what I mean? They need something, they just need something easy, and it still elicits really good thinking. So quite like that.
We did one in December, same team, but we did the ghosts of past, present, and future. So what are those ghosts out there kind of lurking around, or what did we encounter down the dark hallway or whatever? And then what gift would you like to give your team in the new year? So what would you give them for Christmas? What would you give them for the new year? Just really nice sentiment to wrap up the year.
Esther, you reminded me about the analytical way of running retrospective. And so one of the things that we've done here is we run the team health check, looking at things like, do they understand the mission? Do they have enough fun? Do they have enough technical practices? And so taking that kind of soft feelings and converting them into a chart, and then having discussion around that chart, looking at across all these 11 different things, which area it requires more attention and why is that? And so having discussion based on that information is also useful.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
So I have someone here who wants to join us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, is that okay?
Please.
Yeah, hold on just a second here. This is Izzy. She really wanted to be part of it, at least for a minute.
Well, you're occupied with something, and it's clearly interesting, so she wants to know what it is. And she wants to make sure we're not trying to kill you. Fair.
Plus, he's just so adorable that,
The ears.
It's all in the ears.
So what do you all consider makes a successful retrospective? How would you get to the end and consider a single retrospective a success, or how do you notice a trend of successful retrospectives among your teams?
I think all the things we just talked about are great indicators of success. So it doesn't have to be a measurable improvement of we reduced our defects, which would be one measure, or we are we catch issues in the story definition sooner, or we have more conversations with our product owners or our customers. Those are all sort of measurable things, but the improvements in the camaraderie of the team and the ability of the team to process tough conversations, those are all huge measures of success.
And I think for me, one thing that over time that I would want for teams is the ease of decision making. Because I see that's often a big thing, right? So when you start with a new team, it's hard for them to make decisions, and when they make decisions, they're either a little bit airy-fairy, or you have some people bought in and some people not bought in, or there's a lot of lip service because we don't trust each other and we don't really know, and lots of things going on. And so over time, when you can get to that point where the decisions are fast, they're effective, they're well kind of argued or discussed in a kind of respectful, critical thinking kind of way, ideas, and then you get to great decisions faster over time. I feel like that for me is also a great measure, along with everything else we discussed.
To me, the good indication of success of retrospective, if you see team improving over time in the way how they communicate and how much they bond with each other, and coming out of the retrospective being energized, I think it's a good sign, and see that we accomplished together something great, and we actually came up with an action item that we are interested and passionate to take on.
Real action items, on a small kind of scale, real action items coming out of every single retrospective. That's always an important thing. What are we doing it? Who's doing it? Why? When are we going to do it? A nice little plan that is well kind of detailed and everybody knows. Not kind of we're going to communicate better and everybody needs to do it.
Oh, please.
Right.
No.
I like the latest, the Scrum guide, people are calling it revision, but Scrum guide refinement or clarification, they call that out, right? These are not just pie in the sky things, or we're not just going to write them on a paper and remind ourselves 2 weeks from now that we forgot to do anything about them. We're actually going to take at least one of them and put it into the body of work that we're going to focus on in the next sprint.
It has to be in that plan, or else it doesn't stand a chance. It has to be considered real work.
Right. That goes back to what you said at the beginning of teams not setting aside actual time to do something with what they've learned, to act on it, to adapt based on what they've learned. So we had another really interesting question that came up. So as teams are maturing and just overall learning to work better together, do techniques like mob programming eliminate the need for retrospective?
I think probably a lot of stuff gets talked about really quickly when you're in a mob, but it's also useful to step back and say, what are our patterns? Right. So let's just step back and, notice how we have shifted over time, how we've improved over time. What are some things that are recurring that we may not notice that the pattern is recurring? So I think it still can be useful. Maybe you do it at a different cadence.
I'm with Esther. I think there's still that need to step out of where you are and just look backward, exactly for that, for the patterns, for the things that we don't have time to notice while we're mobbing. So sometimes there's also the need for a team to just step back and celebrate maybe, or just step back and appreciate each other, or just step back and some of those other things that you don't always do when you're just busy. So for me, it's important to get out of your context and look at the context from a different area and see well, what we're not seeing when we're in that context. That could help us, because we think we're awesome and we are probably quite awesome, and what could help us be awesomer. If I can create new words here.
I noticed Izzy put her head up when you said you were awesome.
What do you think, Dana? Do you think there are any health signs, or are there other activities we're doing that might take the place of a retrospective?
I think just like Joanne and Esther mentioned, it's all about stepping back and looking at patterns, and it's also about celebration. So it's important to take time, even if you're collaborating very closely, like what you'll see in the mob programming, or sitting together in the same place and you're able to interact all the time. There's still a need to step back, take a breather, and appreciate each other and see how we can get better.
I've seen teams get to a place where they're very open about discussing day-to-day things that they'd like to change. So then when the retro comes up, they might say, I don't feel like we have anything to improve on, because I feel like we improve all the time. But a lot of times we talk a little bit longer and we can uncover something that we could incrementally improve. So.
I like the timeline exercise because it really helps people to see a different perspective, what was happening for every person on the team. And even if they're working together, there might be something personal that was happening that affected the person's ability to be collaborative, or maybe be in a good mood, or even productive. So exposing that information in a safe manner, it's really helpful to rebuild that common understanding and appreciation for each other.
I think you raise a good point. I think I'm going to go back. I'm with a team right now that's been together on a project for almost 12 months. It'll be about 12 months at the end. Then we will stay together, but do officially a new budgetized project. I think I might go back and look at the history of the continuous improvement items, just as kind of a way to wrap up and say, here's the progress that we made. I know for a fact there are some things that were concerns that the team brought up that needed to be taken care of by people who were external to the team that did ultimately get resolved. So it'd be nice to celebrate those changes that were voiced, heard, and acted on.
That's a super idea, because I think it is hard to notice small changes in the system when you're in the system. Because I know that when I visit a company and then I go visit them again in 4 months or something, I can see a lot of difference. But the people who are in it in the day-to-day often don't see the differences. So that's a great way to use retrospectives. Just notice how much we've changed.
Yes, because we forget to do that, especially when we're focusing on like trying to be better and we're going over there and those kinds of things. We forget to kind of go, but how far have we come? And that's also an important thing, even for a mobbing team. Like how far have we come? Where are we now? That is useful for us. And and you could get really kind of critical and analytical about it again, is kind of start thinking about, what are the new patterns, what are the things that we're doing now, or the things that we've let creep in, as entropy, right, that are actually not serving us so well. And if we let it carry on, that will be the big thing, right? But if we address it now and we kind of nip it in the bud, so to speak, then it's gonna be okay, and we'll be better off.
Oh, Esther, you've muted, or Izzy muted you.
Yeah,
Izzy muted me. Thanks, Izzy. So there must be a keyboard shortcut for that, because she had her head on the keyboard for a while. It's better than hearing her snore. But that reminds me, what you were talking about reminds me that one of the big advantages of mobbing is that people are always passively cross-training. oops, that didn't work so well. People are, they're learning from each other. They're learning more about the domain. They're learning near neighbor skills. So, and that stuff happens in tiny little increments. So it can help every once in a while to stop and say, actually I know a lot more about this than I did. And so it enables the group then to take more advantage and to of what everybody knows, right? It's like we may have gone into this mob with the assumption that, Carol doesn't know much about this. And so, acknowledging that, wow, Carol knows a lot about this now and can play a different role in the mob, I think is useful to be conscious of that. I mean, it's probably happening, but to have it in front awareness, I think, and I just picked Carol out of the air, but
that raises a good point, though. I would worry. I mean, even if mobbing is whole team, the whole team isn't there all the time,
right,
every day. So, but presumably you would be at the retro if everyone's agreed to do that and is abiding by that. So, just to have that cadence of everyone coming together and reviewing what you're doing day to day. So we had one other question. Can any of you describe a time where you were in the middle of a rapidly failing retro? You're in the middle of it. And what did you do to recover? Maybe I'm imagining crickets, or I don't know what's worse, crickets chirping or people openly fighting. Probably the crickets for me would be worse. So what do you do about that?
Well, I have one example. I don't know how well I recovered, but I'll share it anyway. So I was running this very large retrospective that we actually prepared in multiple stages. And so I collected the data from all the different stages. And now I was with this group of representatives from all the different sub-teams working through the data and generating insights. And we started with these prime directives, so people know they're not there to point fingers and all that. And so as we working through that process, there was a high-level executive who joined our conversation, and so he didn't hear any of the prime directives. He was not part of setting the safe space, and so he came with a very negative and very command and control approach. And that's where I felt like I failed to establish or prepare him for entering the retrospective in the middle. So luckily, one of the points he made was very similar to what we came up with in our discussion. And so I was able to take his point and tie it to what we discussed through the meeting. And that kind of helped him to turn around.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Joe? Have you experienced that?
Not that specifically, but you mean being in the middle of a retro and going, oh my word, yeah. So when I teach retrospectives, I have these rules, and the one says that you need to have a plan, and then the other one is like you need to have a backup plan, because yes. So I've been in I've started a retrospective, and I had this great plan for what I was going to do with this team, and team walked in. And it was like you could cut the atmosphere with, if you had a steak knife, you could just whoosh the atmosphere with a steak knife. And they all walked in and they basically just said, listen, we just decided that we don't really have time for this. And so you've got 20 minutes. And I was like, wow, okay, sweet. Backup plan. Here we go. And so I had to do adjust a sort of 90-minute retro into a very short kind of, okay, cool. So this is what's happened. I had to kind of set the scene for them, and this is where we are. And now let's kind of generate some insights based on some of that and really limit the scope. Yeah. So it wasn't my finest hour. We did end somewhere it ended somewhere not really not horrible. It wasn't the best place we could have gone, but it wasn't awful. But yeah, it's just lovely to have a team walk in and go like, this is really a waste of our time, and you've got 20 minutes. Alrighty. I nearly wanted to say to them, well, in that case, like, why don't we just go home now and call it? But then I thought, let me see if I can give, like what Dana said, the small little short slice that could help potentially convince them to something better. Yeah, so that's one instance.
So these stories remind me about Martha Stewart. This might surprise you, but she was imprisoned for some securities fraud at one point, and when she got out, she was on a TV show, and the interviewer wanted to ask her about her time in prison. It's kind of an interesting question, and she just, I want to do my salad. I came here to do my salad, and she kept chopping on her salad. And so you can't do that if you're a retrospective facilitator. You have to be able to deal with what comes up in the room anytime you're dealing with humans, right?
Yep.
So, do I get to tell a story?
Absolutely.
I've got a million. I've got a million of them. So I did a retro once where there was a lot of, it'd been a really hard project, and it was at the end of a project, and there was a lot of hurt feelings. So I asked the group to do appreciations, and because that is generally a pretty healing thing to do. And in the middle of this, and there's, people were saying very genuine and heartfelt things to their colleagues, and acknowledging things that had gone unacknowledged, and it was really meaningful for people. And all of a sudden, one of the managers stood up and said, "The wrong people are being appreciated," and stormed out of the room. So I said, "What just happened?" And they said, "Oh, that happens with him a lot." So I said, "Okay, well, so here's what we're going to do next." And I broke them into small groups and had them do some activities. And I got to go stand outside the bathroom door and try to talk to this person and get them into an emotional state where they were willing to come participate in the retro again. That was kind of dramatic.
Wow. That's a good
The wrong people are being appreciated.
Did he ever reveal who should have been appreciated?
No.
Oh.
I think it was just an interesting thing.
So we're coming to the end of our time box here. I did kind of want to go around and ask everyone, and thank you for participating in World Retrospective Day, and everyone who's out at an event or watching this video at another time. If there's one thing that you would like a participant to take away from World Retro Day, what's that? Dana, how about you?
Always make time for retrospectives.
Always make time for retrospectives. What about you, Joe?
Practice and polish your facilitation skills.
How do you recommend people do that, by the way? I know there are some trainings out there, but what are some recommendations you have?
So reading Esther and Diana's book is a really great starting point if you've got nothing, because they've added, thank you, Dana, for the props.
Dana has all the props.
Because they got a lot of really good tips on that that kind of stuff. We could potentially, how could we share some reading with people from here?
Well, there's a book called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making that has a lot of general facilitation advice and a lot of activities for helping people, go through difficult decisions together. There's also an organization called the ICA that offers facilitation training called Technology of Participation. And that's in some ways the underlying framework that the framework in the retrospectives is built on. It's a method based on how people process information when they're thinking clearly. So it's not just good for retrospectives, it's good for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
We can include these in the notes.
Oh yeah, we can put it in the notes. We can also make a slide available that the various World Retro orgs can share. Joe, did you have another reading recommendation?
Oh, no, the one other small thing that I wanted to say was just find a safe way to practice, so practice with your colleagues, practice in a safe area, get feedback, do it better, get more feedback, and like having a great plan is a great way to help with the way you facilitate.
Yeah. And I would agree. We touched on some more fun activities, some game activities, and those can be good for getting people to loosen up a little bit. I've been trying some very lightweight improv exercises lately just to get people up and moving around and talking. But yeah, know your audience. As a couple of you mentioned, there are certain audiences that just would not fly for, so it's good to know that. And I really like the plan of have a plan and a backup plan. I'm going to take that away from this conversation. So,
Yep.
So thank you all for your participation. Any other notes to add?
Enjoy World Retrospective Day.
Yes, enjoy.
Yes.
We assume that many of you are out at activities and you will be enjoying this for the rest of the evening or the day. And thank you for spending time with us. And we look forward to seeing you a year from now at the next World Retrospective Day. Thanks.
Indeed. Yay.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.